colleagues on the other side of the aisle afraid of? Are they afraid of videos of parents?
The gentleman was recognized for his opening statement. Is he finished with his opening statement?
Not finished with
As Republicans pushed to show a video about school board meetings, Democrats said no, citing a rule that requires 48 hours notice for video presentations to be shown. Attorney General Merrick Garland in the hot seat, answering multiple questions from Republicans about his October 4th memo that directs the Federal Bureau of Investigation working with each United States attorney to convene meetings in each federal judicial district within 30 days of the issuance of this memorandum.
I think your memo, Mr. Attorney General, was the last straw. I think it was the catalyst for a great awakening that is just getting started.
The memo, issued 5 days after the National School Board Association wrote to President Biden about a rise of threats by parents to school board officials, writing, "These heinous actions could be the equivalent to a form of domestic terrorism and hate crimes."
Not in a million years did we dream that one day we'd see the Justice Department treat American parents as domestic terrorists.
But Garland said his memo doesn't use the words domestic terrorism or Patriot Act.
I can't imagine any circumstance in which the Patriot Act would be used in the circumstances of parents complaining about their children, nor can I imagine a circumstance where they would be labeled as domestic terrorism.
He says the one-page memo is a warning only for those who threaten or commit violence. The memo does use the phrase other forms of intimidation and harassment without a definition. Garland also asked about the border crisis, specifically asylum cases. Those numbers continue to grow. Garland also said Special Counsel John Durham's budget was renewed, and his investigation into the origins of the Russia probe will continue. Garland pressed on the length of the investigation into the attack on the Capitol last January.
This is really not long at all. I've been in lots of criminal investigations. It took way longer. We've arrested 650 people already.
The Attorney General was asked specifically if he would charge anyone defying a congressional subpoena. Think Steve Bannon. He said, and I quote, "We will apply the facts and the law and make a decision consistent with the principles of prosecution." Brett.
David Spahn on Capitol Hill. David, thanks. Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul says "I told you so" does not begin to cover how he feels about the scandal over the U.S. taxpayer funding of what is called gain-of-function virus research in a Chinese lab. Senator Paul has consistently asserted that Dr. Anthony Fauci's denial of such action constituted lying to Congress. Now, new evidence is spotlighting this issue. This, as the lab leak theory for the origins of the coronavirus gains more support as well. Correspondent Jonathan Seri shows us tonight from Atlanta.
The National Institutes of Health has released documents raising new questions about U.S. government-funded research on viruses conducted in China. In response to a lawsuit filed by The Intercept, the NIH provided annual grant reports from EcoHealth Alliance, which The Intercept says provided additional evidence that the U.S. nonprofit and its subawardee, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, were engaged in risky experiments, and that the NIH may not have been fully aware of these activities. The grant reports outline experiments in which researchers made clones of the virus responsible for the deadly 2012 outbreak of Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS, and gave it properties of other viruses found in bats. Similar reports earlier this year led to this testy exchange on Capitol Hill between Senator Rand Paul and Dr. Anthony Fauci.
You shake an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans. Right. You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about.
The viruses outlined in the grant reports are unrelated to COVID-19. Nevertheless, top scientists, including Dr. Fauci and his boss, NIH Director Francis Collins, say they cannot rule out the theory that the pandemic was the result of a laboratory accident without more cooperation from the Chinese government. Back in the U.S., Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announced he'll convene a special session of the Republican-controlled legislature in November to fight vaccine mandates imposed by businesses.
Your right to earn a living should not be contingent upon COVID shots.
The governor's supporters cheer the fact that COVID-19 cases in Florida are declining despite the state's opposition to mask and vaccine mandates. Although Florida's worst days of the pandemic may be behind it, PolitiFact points out the decline came after Florida led the nation in new cases, and its infection rates are still higher than most states. Brett?
Jonathan Zeri in Atlanta. Jonathan, thank you. Summer, the Financial Times is reporting the second launch was about 2 weeks after the first. Pentagon and U.S. intelligence officials were said to be caught off guard by the advances by the Chinese. The U.S. does not currently have missile defense systems able to track and take down a hypersonic missile. Let's talk about this and other stories with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here.
Great to be. How are you doing tonight, Brett?
I'm good, sir. You knowing what you know about the Chinese and their development militarily and what they have been doing, how concerned are you about these hypersonic missile tests?
Yeah, Brett, this is serious business. Their capability now looks to be within a couple of dozen miles of target for something that travels at multiples of the speed of sound. So this creates a new threat vector for the United States. We've seen several of these during the last 6 to 8 years, not the least of which is certainly their cyber capabilities that you and I have spoken about before as well. And this is serious stuff. We need to respond to it. I would add, Brett, the most important thing we have to keep in mind is the intentions of Xi Jinping, the General Secretary himself, right? He's talked about the fact that he wants to have each of us living in a world that looks like his Marxist-Leninist world. We can't permit that, and this military tool that he's developing is just one arrow in the quiver of Xi Jinping aimed at coercive action, not only against the United States, but against the West.
So the White House has evolved in how it's answering this question. Jen Psaki was asked about the hypersonic weapons test report the other day, and then a series of questions about it today. Take a listen.
We have been consistent in our approach with China. We welcome stiff competition, but do not want that competition to veer into conflict, and that is certainly what we convey privately as well.
Are you concerned about Chinese hypersonic missiles?
Yes.
We're not going to comment on the specific report, but generally speaking, we have made clear our concerns about the military capabilities that the PRC continues to pursue. Yes, do we have concerns? We do, and then we're going to continue to speak out.
What else could this administration be doing, message-wise or otherwise, in result of what's happening?
This is a full-on challenge from the Chinese Communist Party. The first thing one has to do is recognize that this isn't about stiff competition. This is about an intention of a Communist Party that wants to undermine our way of life here in the United States. That's the most important thing you can do, Brett. If you underestimate this, or if you just talk about this as a competition, gosh, they had a good day, we had a bad day, that's not what Xi Jinping and the Communist Party are about. We've seen this with the Soviet Union before. We know how communism works. That's first step. Second, the Obama administration had completely ignored these hypersonic programs, and we began to build out both our capability and the capacity to defend against them. We did the same thing in cyber. They certainly need to continue those. Then they need to build out coalitions, much like we had built out the Quad with Japan and India and Australia, to begin to shape how the West was going to respond to these new set of activities from the Chinese Communist Party. Those are the things that administration can do. You can find friends and partners in big economies around the world to push back against China the way that President Trump and our team did for our 4 years in office.
You were one of the first people to speak out about at least the circumstantial evidence pointing to a lab leak theory in Wuhan and what you were seeing. Now we have this new development about gain-of-function research and what the NIH was doing or not doing. Your thoughts about how that has evolved as well in recent weeks?
Yeah, Brett, I was called racist for contemplating the idea that this virus might well have come from a virology lab inside of China. It's now quite likely that, in fact, that was the case. It's evolved because I think we've had government leaders, including Dr. Fauci, not speak the truth. I heard you play the quote from Senator Paul a bit earlier. He clearly wasn't telling everything he knew about American involvement, taxpayer money going to this virology lab to work on research that was juicing viruses. And there's a lot more questions yet to be answered. I don't think we know the full story. But the fact that this might well have come from that virology lab, and the fact that now, goodness, 2 years on, Brett, the Chinese Communist Party continues to cover up the fact that they allowed a virus to travel around the world that killed 4 million people around the world is something that we should not discount, and that the government, our government, needs to find tools and weapons to respond to the Chinese Communist Party for what they did to the world. This is 4 million people no longer on the planet, Brett, because of what China did.
So how should they pay for it? How should the U.S. push them to pay for if, in fact, that's where this origin came from?
So there's lots of tools. We could certainly find ways to do this in the court system. I've written about options there. There are many where we could use our private court system to benefit those people who were harmed and injured by what the Chinese Communist Party did. But they too need to be held accountable. The World Health Organization is not an organization they should be part of. This administration said, no, we're going to go back into that while they're apart. Well, Brett, that lab is still operating. There's no indication they've improved their safety conditions at that laboratory, and I'm confident they're still working on highly contagious viruses in that laboratory. Those are the kinds of costs you can begin to impose on Chinese Communist Party. They can't be permitted to roam freely around the world and participate in international organizations and hold an Olympics in just a couple of months and do that when, in fact, these people don't care about human life. They took a highly contagious virus that was pretty darn lethal and put people on airplanes to Milan, Italy, and you can see the results. They continue today here in the United States of America. Hundreds of thousands of dead here and lots of people out of work.
Mr. Secretary, I've got to run, but I just want to say personally, you look good. You've lost a lot of lbs. Are you planning for something big?
Thanks for noticing. Yes, my son's getting married in the summer next year, Brett.
Okay, all right, well, we'll peg it on that. Thank you, sir, for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
next, the latest Fox News poll indicates 87% of those responding are extremely or very concerned about inflation and higher prices. 76% feel that way about political divisions and health care. And what schools teach concerns 73%, unemployment at 71%. What schools teach making a big jump. The supply chain crisis is worsening tonight. The number of ships waiting off the coast of Los Angeles to enter port is now more than 100, with dozens more arriving today and tomorrow. Tonight, national correspondent William Lajeunesse on the water looks at how spending so much time at sea waiting is affecting people aboard those vessels. Good evening, William.
Well, Brett, for these crews, most of them are effectively marooned, right, for months. They'd like to get off and go to a Walmart or a CVS, but as foreigners, they can't without being vaccinated, or receive the vaccine, rather. So as for the shipping companies, the supply chain issue is really just the cost of doing business, and they're not hurting.
It's frustrating, like I said, you wanted to go out.
Alberto Insong works on container ships. This is the first time he's been ashore in weeks.
Since this pandemic, I cannot even go home in Honolulu, in my hometown. We cannot get off the ship. They restrict us.
Without a COVID vaccine, most mariners can't leave their vessel, and ship owners don't want them coming back infected.
Can you imagine if you're like 19 to 22 guys and you're out in the middle of the water around these 19 to 22 guys every single day, and you can't contact your family sometimes? It is like being in jail.
It's true in seaports around the world, but worse here because of the backup in the ports. We're 2 to 3 miles off the ports of LA and Long Beach, and what you're looking at is a massive traffic jam in the Pacific. These are basically a floating warehouse, and right now there are 167 ships off these ports. That is a record. And the focus of the supply chain crisis are these, the container ship.
Unfortunately, when we have these bottlenecks and you can't get your product, your container out of the terminal, time's money. You're losing money.
Port officials say despite the slowdown, shippers in China continue booking Los Angeles. Here's what they can expect. The container ship Yangming Reef left China September 5th. It arrived here 15 days later, September 20th. But it remained offshore till October 10th, waiting 20 days to enter the port, 5 days longer than the trip itself from China.
There's 10 major shippers. They control over 85% of all the waterborne transportation of goods in the whole world.
So experts say the ocean shipping industry is on course for record profits this year, fueled by spot rates from China on these containers, up 50% to the East Coast, 127% to the West Coast, Brad, and they are still setting records tonight. Back to you.
William Lajeunesse, and the waters off the port of Los Angeles. William, thanks. Another major problem for this president, this administration tonight, rising gasoline prices. You are paying more right now for fuel than you have in the last 7 years. Fox Business Network correspondent Jeff Block takes a look tonight from Abington, Pennsylvania. Good evening, Jeff.
Good evening to you, Brett. As perhaps you can see, the sun is setting on yet another day of increased fuel prices. The sign back there behind me pushing $4 for the gallon of premium gas. Tends to be higher here in the Northeast than the national average, which tonight comes in at $3.37, the average gallon of regular gas. 1 year ago, it was $2.16. That's a 56% increase. And what that means, of course, is that we've got a whole lot less money to spend on other things. One research group finds that for every dime of increase in the price of a gallon of gas, it's 1.3 billion with a B dollars taken out of discretionary spending. They estimate that leading up to Christmas, we will have, because of high gas prices, $35 billion less to spend on other things. And according to the oil gurus who forecast the future, it's not going to change anytime soon.
Personally, I see that continuing to rise another couple of cents a gallon until we get relief in the crude oil market from more oil supplies returning. Unfortunately, this is going to be bad news for the consumer through the balance of 2021.
And that crude oil market, is under some pressure because as we look forward to a green economy and less reliance on fuels, the reticence on the part of the oil companies is to spend money to explore. If you look at the numbers on oil exploration, as recently as 2014, we spent over $700 billion a year looking for new oil. By 2018, that had been reduced to less than $500 billion. And this year, or last year, it was about $300 billion or more. This year, probably about the same. Until we get to that green economy, it might cost us some green. Brett?
One guy dropping by has gas. All right, Jeff, thank you. Agenda. While intra-party divisions continue to chip away at the bottom line, the president's promises to hold the line on costs for people who are not wealthy seem to be fading with each day of the supply chain crisis and the rising inflation across the country. White House correspondent...
Sad that people voted him into office, but the country's in a mess. Shamefully.
The process of governing is frustrating and sometimes dispiriting.
At a ceremony celebrating a statue of Dr. Martin Luther King, the president veered way off topic, talking COVID relief.
Think about it. Like, what'd you do for me lately? Well, we had $1.9 billion we took care of.
Republican critics...
And they're following my predecessor, the last president, into a deep, deep black hole in the abyss.
Oh, what a jerk. Jeez. Sad.
Wildfire, hurricanes.
His staff handled the finer...
Shamefully attacking Donald Trump and Mike Pence.
It will be transformational.
It could also get people hooked on government programs, according to Republicans.
Come on, Joe.
The cost, start a whole lot of programs and claim that it doesn't really cost that much because they expire in a year or two. And the goal, of course, is that they all become so popular that we get them forever.
Biden officials aren't sweating the cost.
We see the cost as zero because it's going to be paid for.
But American consumers are paying more for nearly everything.
Everything.
Supply chain problems persist, introducing new questions about the president's pledge not to make the middle
And look at the borders.
For his policies.
You guys say
look at the oil lines.
Want to raise taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year. But there's a new Fox poll that finds 83% of registered voters are noticing bills for groceries and everyday items increasing. So how is that any different than a new tax?
Well, look, and when you say, can you give me a little bit more? Like, what's the...
Well, the supply chain is all backed up. There are bottlenecks, empty shelves, prices going up, people are paying more. And so how is that any different than a new tax?
So I would say this, we're dealing with a historic and evolving pandemic that is impacting our economy.
Sheesh. Talk about the stalled Build Back Better plan, then the major increases in the cost of meat, poultry, fish, and eggs. So a lot's changed here in just 3 months when White House officials celebrated that they calculated the cost of a 4th of July barbecue for the whole family had fallen 16 cents. Right.
Shamefully. How anybody could even be for them. It's time to remove them in 2022 and 2024.
Congressional correspondent Chad Pergram tells us where things stand tonight.
Democratic leaders want a framework for the bill soon.
We've rounded the turn and we're almost to the stretch.
But we heard that last month.
We're proceeding, that we've made great progress and we're proceeding. I think we're in a very good place.
That's why there's skepticism about finishing up now.
It isn't done yet, and it will be because now we have to narrow the scope and we're in the process of doing that.
Rebate with the Senate so that everything is signed off here?
We will have an agreement that we will pass both houses.
But it's hard to know where key senators stand, like Arizona's Kirsten Sinema.
Sir, any comment on your stance on the corporate tax rate? Any comment on your stance on anything, Senator?
And there's conjecture about bickering behind closed doors between Senators Joe Manchin and Bernie Sanders. That's not helping matters. There's lots to settle about taxes and climate policy. There may not be a clean energy plan, but Pelosi pledges drastic cuts in carbon emissions.
Sheesh.
Democrats are searching for balance.
The top line is what's important. I think we're very, very close to having a deal.
They all ought to be voted out. Shameful.
I think it's just a matter of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Pelosi is selling the plan hard.
This legislation will be paid for. In fact, it may be more than paid for.
Oh, nonsense.
No one knows the true cost of a still
They don't even know what's in it.
It's going to cost trillions of dollars. Someone's going to pay for it, but it's a future generation.
If Democrats are able to nail down details of the bill, that could unlock a vote on the infrastructure bill next week. But a vote on the spending bill may not come until next month. Right?